Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. Russian President Vladimir Putin made an announcement today. NATO leaders are calling it an attack without weapons. And President Biden has agreed to meet with Putin later this week, so long as tanks aren't rolling into Ukraine. Hundreds of truckers are getting set to drive across country. This time they won't be delivering any goods, but they do have a strong message. We have an interview with Maureen, the organizer of the People's Convoy. With the American trucker Convoy set to bring their message to Washington, D.C., they want life to get back to normal so they can make ends meet. But President Biden just told Congress to extend the COVID state of emergency. Here's the latest on Russia. President Biden has agreed in principle to meet with Putin later this week, as long as tanks aren't rolling in. This as Putin prepares to recognize two separatist states in Ukraine, a move some NATO leaders say is one step closer to Putin declaring war. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the latest.
Russian leader Putin made a pivotal announcement on Monday, officially recognizing the independence of two rebel-controlled regions of Ukraine.
I consider it necessary to make a long overdue decision to immediately recognize the independence and sovereignty of Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic.
This drew immediate backlash from Western forces who say it's a violation of international law. The White House is now imposing sanctions to block U.S. investment in the two regions Putin named. But the sanctions do not hit Russia directly. The White House clarifies more is to come. Press Secretary Jen Psaki writes, "To be clear, these measures are separate from and would be in addition to the swift and severe economic measures we have been preparing in coordination with allies and partners should Russia further invade Ukraine." Shortly afterward, Putin sent Russian troops into those two breakaway regions. The Kremlin says Putin ordered the Russian forces to maintain peace in eastern Ukraine.
It is a repudiation of the Minsk process and the Minsk agreements, and I think it's a very ill omen and a very dark sign.
And the Pentagon warns again that a Russian invasion appears imminent.
A Russian attack could come any day now. Well, today might be that day, and we hope that's not the case.
Some airlines are canceling their flights to Ukraine, and some Ukrainians are evacuating neighborhoods.
There's an evacuation happening. I have 2 kids, and I'm responsible for them. That's why the decision was taken quickly.
But at the same time, the White House pledged to leave a path open for diplomacy as long as possible. Secretary of State Antony Blinken plans to meet with Russia's foreign minister this Thursday. And while President Biden is prepared to meet with Putin later this week as a last-ditch effort for de-escalation, Russia says it's too early to even have this discussion about a potential meeting with Biden. Meanwhile, Ukraine's president says no progress can be made without consulting with him first. Biden did speak with Zelensky for about a half hour today. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Congresswoman Yvette Herrell of New Mexico wants to offer asylum to those involved in the Canadian trucker protests. The Congresswoman says she's introducing a bill granting asylum to innocent Canadian protesters. She says their government is persecuting them. Canadian protesters had their property confiscated and their bank accounts frozen by the government. Some also experienced violence from the police. Herrell told Fox News earlier that Canada has not evoked something this serious since World War I and II. She writes on Twitter, quote, "Just as we provide asylum for political prisoners, we should do the same for truckers." Washington, D.C. police are preparing with local and federal agencies for a convoy planning to arrive at the Capitol in March. An American trucker movement similar to the one in Canada is calling for an opening of the economy and the dropping of all mandates. The movement is called the People's Convoy, which will start rolling from California on Wednesday. Organizers describe it as a peaceful and law-abiding transcontinental journey toward the East Coast. Their press release says that the last 2 difficult years have hurt everyone financially. And since vaccines and therapeutics have helped get COVID-19 under control, they want an end to the, quote, state of emergency. The convoy is scheduled to arrive in D.C. on March 5th. And truckers across the country will be leading the way in a convoy to raise awareness on what they're calling excessive and unconstitutional pandemic-related restrictions. Our next guest is the national organizer of the People's Convoy, Maureen Steele. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Maureen, you are the main organizer of this truck convoy that's originating in the United States, set to kick off this week. Tell us, what is your scheduled route, and more importantly, what is your message?
Well, the scheduled route, we're leaving from Barstow, California, at Adelanto Stadium on Wednesday, the 23rd. We're going to be rolling out around 11 a.m. And the point of the convoy, it's America's answer to our northern neighbors' freedom convoy. It's our answer to their cry for freedom. And the truckers, you know, they wanted to roll. They were all gathering in small groups, and that's when I stepped in to help them organize. And here we are. The truckers' declaration was written a couple weeks ago, and that's gone around on the internet with the demands of what the truckers want and what the American people want. We want the emergency, the state of emergency lifted. We want our Constitution to reign supreme, and we want accountability, and we want our economy back. The American people, you know, the working man has suffered greatly with the mandates and, you know, small businesses, you know, collapsing, you know, the job market, everything. There's been a lot of suffering that has happened over the last couple of years.
Now, Maureen, as we saw in Canada, there was a lot of disinformation to minimize the message of the truckers up there. They were labeled as racist. A bunch of other buzzwords were thrown around at them. So what type of people do you expect to be joining your convoy?
Well, that wasn't the case in Canada. I know that was what was going around in mainstream media up there, but it certainly wasn't the case. I was on the phone with the Canadians every day, still am. So it was pretty much the entire country that rose up. It was the smallest group that stayed home and didn't participate. It's the same here. We have moms, we have students, we have fathers, we have, you know, immigrants, we have Polish, we have Sikhs, we have Native Americans, blacks. I mean, every walk of life is being represented in this convoy because it's a slice of Americana, and that's what America is. We're a great melting pot.
Now, we saw what has transpired up in Canada over the past few days with the government cracking down on them. Is this a concern for you guys, and what type of reaction have you been getting up until this point?
We have been operating with local municipalities and police along our route, engaging with them ahead of time. We also have lawyers on board that are helping us to make sure that we're within the law as we're rolling through, you know, entering small towns, or as we go through small towns, to make sure that we're welcome there, having this gigantic convoy rolling through. You know, anticipating what happened in Canada, you know, I don't know what our government is going to do here. It appears that it's simply as tyrannical as Trudeau up there. So we're trying to stay rolling and moving, marshalling on private property instead of public property or city-owned property. I think that is one of the issues that they had up in Canada. As far as our money goes, we tried to learn a little bit from what happened up there. We have lawyers and accountants, and our money is being held in a third-party entity. Money is being swept out of the bank accounts very swiftly and put into private banks, so that our money can't be frozen. So we've taken every precaution that we could. You know, I don't know what the government is going to do. We have the right to gather. We have the right to protest. We have freedom of speech in this country, even though it's being suppressed. And this is one of the reasons we're doing it. So we'll see what happens.
Now, just my last question for you, Maureen. Is this only for truckers, or are others welcome to join in, you know, with their own vehicles?
Oh, this is everybody. Like I said, this is the people's convoy. This isn't the truckers' convoy. This is being spearheaded by the American trucker, as has every bid for freedom in the history of our country, it's always the blue collar boys that jump in first. But this is absolutely all the people. Like I said, there's moms. There's moms putting their kids in Subarus with the family dog and coming on this convoy. And people are welcome to join the convoy at our marshalling points and even just ride for a day. So if you can only ride for a day or ride for a couple 100 miles, join the convoy. Come and show support and celebrate freedom with your fellow American.
Maureen Steele, thank you.
Thank you.
Members of Congress are expressing concern over the vaccine mandate for truck drivers traveling between the United States and Canada. The Congress members sent a letter to President Biden highlighting the Freedom Convoy protests that took place in Canada. The letter states that the vaccine mandates are causing major disruptions to the trucking industry and to the U.S. supply chain. The letter also says that the Biden administration is harming the U.S. economy by burdening an already depleted workforce in the trucking industry. And President Biden says he will extend the national emergency over COVID-19. It was set to expire on March 1st. Now President Biden says that he needs it to be extended due to risk to public health and safety. On Friday, Biden sent a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He says there was a need to respond to COVID with the full capacity and capability of the federal government. CDC data shows that as of late last year, there were 60,000 more COVID deaths under Biden than under the Trump administration. The CDC has just come under fire over a New York Times article that was published on Sunday that states the CDC has been withholding data and information because, quote, it's not ready for prime time. The CDC has often been criticized for acting as a political apparatus of the government as opposed to its intended function, which is to provide the public with clear and forthcoming health guidance. Washington's birthday should not just be another day off from work or school, but a day to reflect on the man who founded the United States of America and laid the foundation for what has become the greatest country on earth. Author and historian John Berlau joins us to discuss. And happy President's Day. Former President Trump's social media platform is available for download on the App Store. It's called Truth Social. Beijing announced sanctions on 2 American companies for the 3rd time in as many years, but the rogue regime isn't giving many details. Washington's birthday should not just be another day off from work or school, but a day to reflect on the man who founded the United States of America and laid the foundation for what has become the greatest country on earth. Author and historian John Berlau joins us to discuss. And happy President's Day. Former President Trump's social media platform is available for download on the App Store. It's called Truth Social. Beijing announced sanctions on 2 American companies for the 3rd time in as many years, but the rogue regime isn't giving many details. Today is President's Day, in celebration of George Washington's birthday, founder of our country who laid the framework for the greatest country the world has ever seen. Much of what Washington did during his time helped to shape America into the country that people from all over the world want to live, whether that be for greater economic opportunities, fleeing poverty or war-torn countries, or perhaps escaping communism where freedom of belief is being suppressed. Whatever it may be, it's important to remember why we have what we have in America. Our next guest is an author and historian who wrote the book George Washington, Entrepreneur. Here's a look. John Berlau, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Now, John, as you've written in your book, George Washington was an amazing figure. You've studied him in great depth. Besides the obvious reasons, what makes him special?
Think what makes him unique and what makes him relatable to many Americans in this entrepreneurial society is that George Washington was very much the entrepreneur. He was a pioneering entrepreneur, in fact. He wasn't as fortunate in his financial circumstances as a child as some of the other founding fathers. His father died when he was 11, and his family could never afford to send him to college or really formal schooling beyond the age of 13. Plus, he had to help support his family when his father passed. But Washington, through pluck and a little luck and self-education, made his fortune through his creative entrepreneurial mind, starting out as a freelance surveyor, sort of the gig economy job of its day, as far as the surveying the different farmland, plus the beginnings of the city of Alexandria. Built a reputation as a top surveyor, acquired real estate along the way.
Now, was George Washington always as beloved as he is now, all these years later, or what were some of the challenges that he may have faced during that time?
He certainly had his ups and downs, and he made mistakes, and he wasn't perfect, and there were some disagreements in the latter part of his presidency about whether we should support the French or should we have a treaty with Britain, the Jay Treaty, when they were with when Britain had been our enemy just a few years back, and Washington always looked out for what was the best interest in the country. But I think he was a beloved figure for most of his time, and one of the things that made him a beloved figure is people knew about his business, and it may have been one of the reasons he was actually chosen as general. That John Adams, in nominating him to lead the Continental Army, specifically mentioned Washington's independent fortune. There wasn't a lot of mass communication then, and Washington didn't have all of that many great feats in the French and Indian War, where he fought with the British as a colonel. But people seem to know from the G. Washington signature on his flower, and the Mount Vernon as a business, sort of gave him his reputation that it would end up boosting his career as a politician and a statesman.
Now, John, some might say that we've been through a cultural revolution of our own over the past 2 years, and it still continues. As a historian, why would you say that it's important to preserve history in its original form?
I would say it's important because everyone can learn from George Washington just as everyone can learn from Aristotle, even though neither were perfect men. Aristotle wrote that some men were natural slaves, and that was the system of the thing. That was just the system of things, the natural order. But he still had a lot of wisdom that everyone can learn from. Washington, by contrast, was born into a system of slavery, not just in America but around the world. But he ended up seeing the wrongness of it, and wrote about that, spoke publicly in as early as 1774 in condemning the slave trade, and then at the end of his life, in a very public statement in his will, freed all of the slaves, all 124 in his possession, one immediately and the rest upon Martha's death, and she freed them a year later. So giving Washington's and the Founding Fathers recognition of equal human rights, which was really was a revolutionary concept. Not everybody believes it like they say they do now. Everybody needs to learn that. You are shortchanging the younger generations if you don't teach them about both the humanity and the greatness of Washington and America's Founding Fathers.
I think it's a very important point. He wasn't the founder of slavery, and he took great steps to eventually abolish it. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that.
Very, very much so. All the Founding Fathers did. The Northwest Ordinance, where they, banned slavery in certain territories, and what was the Northwest then, what would become the Midwest in states like Ohio. That was their plan, and it allowed I don't know if they couldn't have seen it directly, but in those states that those territories that the founders had, sort of earmarked as free, that's where the abolitionist movement grew. And plus, you had the northern states that as soon or a couple years after the revolution was declared, states like Massachusetts would have emancipation laws that freed the enslaved, and that really had not happened in the world before. So this was a revolution that indeed inspired the abolitionist movement. Would always say look to the Declaration of Independence and the founders. So their work was unfinished, and you can fault them for not moving fast enough, but they moved faster than really anyone else in history to try to limit and gradually abolish it.
John Berlau, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about my book, George Washington Entrepreneur.
Former President Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, is available for download on the App Store. Trump's media company finally launched the app on Sunday. Former California Congressman Devin Nunes left Congress to run the new media company. He said that the app will be fully operational in March. The front page of the app says it's America's big tent social media platform. It encourages an open, free, and honest global conversation without discriminating against political ideology. Users downloading the app are being added to a wait list. The app experienced slow performance when large numbers of users started to sign up early on Sunday. Beijing announced Monday that Lockheed Martin and RAYTHEON Technologies are under sanctions over arms sales to Taiwan. This is at least the third time the Chinese regime has enacted penalties against the U.S. defense companies. The Chinese Communist Party says the two companies recently sold over $100 million in arms to Taiwan. China has announced similar action toward Lockheed and RAYTHEON in 2019 and 2020. But Beijing never gave details about what those sanctions were or how they would be enforced. The United States does not sell weapons to China. However, the U.S. does provide Taiwan with means to defend itself, in accordance with the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act. And U.S. weapons sales have always attracted Beijing's ire. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will visit Taiwan next week to meet with President Tsai Ing-wen. That's according to a Monday statement from Taiwan officials, who called the visit a show of Washington's, quote, unanimous bipartisan support for Taiwan. Last week, the United States Coast Guard offloaded more than $1 billion in illegal narcotics. In total, there were over 54,000 pounds of cocaine and nearly 16,000 pounds of marijuana. The Coast Guard intercepted the drugs in international waters off the Eastern Pacific and in the Caribbean Sea. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.